poor people. When Laura Trott won her double Olympic gold, it was about so much more than her riding around a cycling track really, really fast. So she had to think about her kit, she had to think about her bike, she had to think about her diet, nutrition, her mental state of mind, she had to think about her stamina. She had a whole heap of things that contributed to her success at the Olympics. It wasn't just about cycling around a track really fast. My name's Roberta Stafford, and I'm here to talk to you about Agile values and principles and how they can help you try and win Olympic gold in your organisation. So just want to check who's in the room today. So if you're a member of an Agile team, so maybe Scrum Master or developer or product owner, just raise your hand. Oh. If you're more of a sort of Agile coach type person who nudges and prods, if you're someone who's just working in the business and is curious about Agile, raise your hand. Hi. If you're lost, raise your hand. If you're hungover, raise your hand. Yes, I see your pain. Okay, so this is where I work. So I work at Capital One. My name's Roberta Stafford. I've been there for about, I guess, 3 years, and we've been experimenting with working in a more agile way for about 3 or 4 years, broadly. And in terms of our cycling analogy, I guess we've cycled really fast. Probably for a couple of years now. So from a software engineering point of view, we've done quite a good job of embedding Agile values and principles into how those software engineering teams work. So we do loads of cool stuff in that space. That's about 40 teams, broadly. But we have quite a bold ambition at Capital One, and that is to change banking for good. There's quite a lot of work to do there, but change banking for good. And what we mean by that is we want to put technology at the heart of what we do so that when the inevitable disruption to our industry happens, financial services, we're ready and we don't become a Blockbuster or a Kodak. So we believe, well, our CEO actually believes, that being an agile organisation is a really important building block to ensure that we achieve that mission. So my job is to help prod and push and coax and encourage and nudge and all of those words the organisation to think about to think about changing how it works. And with the cycling analogy, I guess our cycling around the track, we are quite good at that. So we've been practicing Scrum in our sort of 40 agile teams, and we've got some people in those teams who really care about making sure that we continue to improve. So that's kind of going well. But as I said at the start, to achieve a bold ambition, it's so much more than that. And we're really conscious that to reinvent ourselves as an organisation, we've got to embed agility into every single corner. But when I talk to Nina, who works in our legal department, and when I talk to Karen, who works in our HR department, they just look at me with that sort of bewildered face that I've come quite accustomed to. And for them, they say, but that's a tech thing. Agility, that's a tech thing, right? That's a tech thing. And for me, I don't think it is. And I think there's only so fast that we can cycle around the track before we need to start to think about those other things that will help us win that Olympic gold. So that's my job. To do that, hopefully you all recognise this. You should recognise this for sure. You all recognise this, right? You've seen this before? Of course you have. You've been on an Agile conference for 2 days. We didn't reinvent the wheel. So what we said was, we need to take the essence of Agile values and principles, and we know that no one can remember those 12 principles, right? We need to take the essence of those and make them really accessible to people who don't work in tech. And we need to help them understand how those values and principles can help them improve how they do work. So that's what we did. you'll have heard, and actually reassuringly, what I've heard over the last couple of days is the same themes cropping up time and time again. And you'll hear them all again from me today, but with a sort of fancy little takeaway at the end. Because this stuff, right, this is what we all live and breathe every day. But it's about making it feel accessible for people who, for me, don't work in software engineering. So the principles that we came up with, we use them as a bit of a North Star. So in the work that I do, I use them to generate the right conversations and ask some difficult questions. They're like my North Star. If ever I'm stuck, I look at the principles and think about asking questions to help the teams think about how they work in a slightly different way. Let's dive straight in. So the first principle, and this one looks a bit weird, the first one really resonates with the 5-year-old inside of me. So start with why. And I've heard this so many times over the past couple of days, but it's, I think in a big organisation like mine, so there's about 2,000 of us, it's so easy to get lost in stuff and work that has little or no point. It still amazes me how easy it is for that to happen. For work to creep in where, you know, you ask people, why are we doing this? And everyone looks at you like you've said, that cat has blue feet. It's really easy to lose sight of why are we actually doing this work? What's the outcome that we really care about? What does success look like for this? My belief, the belief in my team, is that if you start by really understanding what you're doing, and more importantly, why you're doing it, you'll give yourself the best opportunity to add value. Simple. A good example of this being applied in practice in Capital One. A couple of years ago, we set up this group of teams. So there were, I think, 6 in total. And the sponsor for that work, we asked them to approach it in a slightly different way. So ordinarily, they would have said, here's the things I want you to do. We asked them to set a really clear and simple vision, a really clear and simple why, which they did. And their why, or the problem that they wanted solving, was when customers come to our website, not all of them finish the application process that they start. They drop off for various reasons. We had a whole bunch of data that told us where they dropped out. The challenge was set to the teams, reduce that by 10% by the end of the year, if you can. What the product owners and the teams then did was sat and thought about what's the best way to achieve that. And we encouraged them to try some of the little experiments, some of the inspect and adapt ideas that you've heard about over the last couple of days. And actually, by having that really clear vision that didn't really dive into, and this is how I wanted solving, it was just, here's what we want to achieve, that really helped the teams organise themselves to solve that particular problem. And that sponsorship and clarity didn't waver all year. It just kept getting reinforced. And it set the right context for the teams to be able to figure out the best way for them to solve that particular problem. So that was a good example that worked. Second principle, make work visible. It's almost, this is so obvious, it almost doesn't need saying, but like Linda, I think it was Linda talked about the common senses. This is common sense, like carry a brolly in the rain rather than bloodletting and leeches and that stuff. But this is common sense to me. And this is a great place to start having some powerful conversations with teams who feel a bit stuck, like it's just not working for them. There's lots of sort of words in here that I really like. So by starting the conversations with teams to say, let's have a look at your world. Let's have a look at all of your work. Let's visualise your processes and let's visualise how work moves through your system in your team. We can start to see if we've got too much work in progress, and that's like an epidemic for us at Capital One, I'm not going to lie. It shows where you've got queues of work and maybe some bottlenecks that you can take a look at. It shows where you've got impediments, so things that are stopping you getting good stuff done. And ultimately, the goal is to, when you make some improvements, to then improve how your valuable stuff flows through your particular system. Common sense stuff again. We had a great conversation with our legal team. So remember Nina? Nina in our legal team. So with our legal team, which is, let's say, 20 people, we asked them to visualise their work. We had a bit of a hunch that they had too much on their wheel. So we said, let's have a look. They actually needed to hire an extra wall to kind of make it all visible. So it gives you some indication of how much they'd actually got on their plate. When they'd visualised their work, they then stood and looked at that and said, after their first reaction, which was, oh, look at all of our work, they then said, shit, look at all of our work. They identified they had too much work in progress. As a team, they stripped out all the bits that were just cluttering it up, things they'd started but not done, that didn't really matter, took those out. They also identified that all roads led to, we'll call him Rupert, because that was his name, all roads led to Rupert. So Rupert was a bottleneck of sign-off, review, comments, etc. And the team identified some practical ways to delegate some of the tasks that went to Rupert to other people, thus freeing up their system from that bottleneck, essentially. They also discovered that all of their work had, I guess, different priorities depending on who was asking for it and what it was contributing to. And they identified that they weren't differentiating their work in that way. All work was equal to a certain extent, which isn't true. So they suggested, or they decided that what they wanted to do about that was to have, well, to start off with, 2 different classes of service. So work A would have an SLA of, I think they said 2 days. Work type B, they would turn around in about a week. So this was quite a helpful way of them controlling their work and making sure that stakeholders were really clear on what they could expect and when. I guess a thorn for me, so probably one of the things I'd love to tackle at Capital One that I've not yet got into is, under this banner, how do we think about our organisational priorities in a more holistic way? So I talked before about we're really busy, we have lots of stuff in progress. I'd love to get our exec team to make their priorities and their backlog visible so that we can see how all of the team's work and efforts contribute to that overall backlog. That's just a crazy idea I have. I've got no sponsorship for it yet. But it's something, it's a thorn in my side that I think if we were better at that, I think we would help speed up the delivery of the stuff that matters most. Because my hunch is, we've got too much on. That's the thorn anyway. Still okay? Everyone's still sort of hanging in there. You're doing well, I'm proud. Next principle, so learn with feedback. For me, and for Capital One, this is all about minimising risk. So risk is a big deal for us. As you'd imagine, we're regulated financial services. For software engineering teams, they've got sprints, they've got regular feedback loops. It's easy to get those feedback loops as a result of the process that you follow when you follow Scrum. But for other teams who maybe aren't sprinting, how do they build in those feedback loops? Practical example for us, at Capital One, where we've experienced a drop in employee engagement. The data point that tells us that is the annual associate survey that says, how do you feel about working here? It's still a good place to work. If anyone's thinking of coming, by the way, we're still doing very well, but it's not quite as good as it was. Our hunch is it's because we're trying to drive quite a lot of change at the moment, and I think people are feeling a bit scared and a bit lost and a bit confused and a bit uncertain. We'd love them to be feeling positive about it and excited, but they're not. HR want to do some stuff to try and help make people feel better about the change that's happening around them. But they need to know if the stuff that they're doing is having the impact and effect that they want. An annual all-associate survey, an annual feedback loop is just not going to cut it. So we've been doing some work with them to say, under this banner, how can we get a more regular pulse check so that we can check that the stuff that you're doing is having the impact that you want? Kind of like in service stations when you push those smiley faces to say whether the toilets are clean or not. Everyone's still with me. So we're working with them on a practical way that they can get that regular pulse check under that banner to check whether what they're doing is having the right impact. The thorn in my side under this banner, and again, I think it was Adam. Was Adam here? No. Adam talked about it yesterday, the performance management piece. Performance management is the thorn in my side. We haven't cracked that at all, and it's something I'd love to step into next. We have an annual performance review, maybe like lots of you guys do, and it just feels, to me, inconsistent with this. And Adam talked about some practical ways to get a more lightweight, 360, regular feedback loop going with people who actually work with you day in, day out. We'd love employees to have a better idea of the impact they're having on others on a more frequent basis. So that's the sort of the thorn that I'd love to get into under that banner next. Deliver early and often, our next principle. Again, this is something you'll have heard over the last couple of days a lot of times. A lot of the speakers have mentioned this. And with software engineering, again, this sprint cycle means that you are encouraged to deliver small bite-sized chunks of valuable stuff every 2 weeks, every 1 week, every 3 weeks, depending on what your cycle is. The reason? Because having lots of stuff in work is only valuable and useful when it's actually in the hands of the people that are going to consume it. Now for us, it's our end customers, the people with our credit cards. I should have said actually I'm not the music station because lots of people think I work for Capital Radio. Not that exciting at all. So it's our customers who use our credit cards, but it's also sometimes internal customers as well. But this principle resonates for all. Work is only valuable when it's in the hands of those people that are going to consume it. And our desire is that we deliver to those customers as early as we can, as often as we can, in a predictable way and as cheaply as possible. But again, how does that resonate for people who aren't doing software engineering, who aren't doing sprints? I'll tell you about Joe. So Joe was a guy I worked with in our help files team. And like the name suggests, Joe was responsible for the files that our call agents use, so the people on the phones dealing with customer queries. They have not scripts as such, but some hints and tips about things that they should and shouldn't do. I'm trying to remember who talked about deployment should be boring. Who talked about deployment should be boring? That was Rebecca? Yeah. Deployments for Joe were anything but boring. They were a really big deal for him. He used to do upgrades and updates to these files once every 6 months. You can imagine how poor Joe felt trying to coordinate all of the different things that people wanted in those files every 6 months. His resource was allocated to him every 6 months. It was a nightmare for him. Under this banner, we spent time with Joe helping him work with his stakeholders and look at his process to identify ways to make that more boring. We've now got Joe to a place where he's updating his help files every week. So essentially he's sprinting now, even though it's almost a process rather than software engineering. Deployments for Joe are now super boring. They are no big deal. It's like the person who talked about the app upgrades when it says bug fixes and minor enhancements. That's Joe's world now, and Joe loves it. He's a happy customer. Training, he doesn't need to bother training the agents because actually it's just little tweaks here and there. So for Joe, it's not a big deal anymore. And that's exactly what we want to drive through this. The thorn in my side on this one is conversations I have with our finance colleagues at the moment. Because we are a US-led company, as you know, our budgeting process feels a bit clunky. It's an annual thing with then quarterly forecasting. And again, with this principle in mind, that feels a little bit big bang. And I'm trying to get into conversations with them about how we can make that less of a big bang and a big deal and a big annual process and more of a something we increment our way through. But we're miles away from that. But that's the thorn in my side on that one. Final principle, and this is my favourite catch-all bucket. The amount of conversations that we can have with people under this banner is fantastic. There are so many powerful words in this for me. Empower motivated collaborative teams. Again, you'll have heard this so many times over the last few days. But this is about self-sufficient teams, so they've got everything they need to get the job done. They understand their purpose, so it links back to the first one. Super crisp on why. Super crisp on why. They frequently work together, and by work together, that means they have those great relationships, those honest relationships where they can leverage each other's skills and work collaboratively together to get the problem solved. They do that frequently. And the real nugget for me is they're trusted. They are trusted to solve those problems. There's a team I'm currently working with at Capital One, and I'll protect the innocent and not name them. It's almost like they've taken every one of those words and sort of ignored them. So they're not clear on their purpose. They're newly formed, so they don't have those great working relationships. So they're not getting great work done together. They don't trust each other. And they're not trusted to solve the problems either. So it's like a melting pot of dysfunction. And where we've started with that, because there's so much to do, and it's easy to jump to, let's define the process for how we get work done here. But actually, we're taking a step back from that. And under that banner, we're saying, let's make sure this team is really clear on the problem they're trying to solve. And it's amazing how much time that can sometimes take. But that's where we're focusing. The second thing that we're doing is saying, how do we help that team create some awesome working relationships where they start to trust each other? And then the third thing we're doing is saying, and how do we get our leadership team to trust them to solve those problems? So this is keeping me very busy at the moment. The thorn in my side on this one is our leadership culture at Capital One, if I'm honest. That last word, that trusted, is such a powerful one for us. Because the comment I often get is, we do trust our teams to do stuff, but we're a regulated company, don't you know? So it's how do you create an environment where people feel empowered to solve the problems they're being asked to do, but in an environment that does have some constraints that we need to be mindful of. We need to ensure our regulator stays happy with what we do. That's not to say that we can't create an environment where our teams are trusted to solve those problems. So that's the thorn in my side that I'm working on under that banner right now. So we're there. I've left time for questions. So in summary, in my opinion, if you're serious about winning Olympic gold, it's about more than cycling around the track fast. It's about working across the organisation with some common sense principles that resonate with people, no matter who they are and what work they do, so that your whole organisation can work together to help achieve what for you is your Olympic gold. And for us, it's so that we can change banking for good. That's it. Any questions? Cool. I'll hand out the freebies, so this is just a little summary.
With your team that's sort of new and not necessarily stable,
Yes.
how can that team was put together rather than placing the new people in the existing teams and then cherry pick out the existing teams, a stunt team, to temporarily?
It's got distracted.
Yeah,
So what's the question? The question was...
shiny
So the question was, why was it put together that way?
Yeah, rather than putting the new people into existing teams in their necessary role, and those people have the existing teams put together into a stunt team to cover them up and everything.
So, I'm wondering how honest to be here. So we've recently really ramped up the amount of people we've hired from externally. So we're